and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah.
And today we'll be discussing Dragons of Autumn Twilight by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman, the first book in the Dragonlance Chronicles, which is a D&D novelization. And I feel like I just said an entire novel to introduce this book.
You did, but I'm going to add to it because this book was picked by our patrons for us to cover on the podcast. And if you support us on Patreon, you too can vote in a poll of books that we predetermine to decide what book we're going to cover once a quarter.
We just put like little themed lists together. It's not that nuts.
No, it's not. But given that our original concept was patrons can decide what book we're going to cover, this is, a lot more directed.
Look, we're not looking for Bodie McBoatface here, okay?
It makes it easier for us to figure out a book if we don't have people giving us options willy-nilly. It's true.
Yeah, I don't know how anyone would come to a consensus if it was just suggest a book.
I don't think it would be possible, to be perfectly honest.
We're helping them. Anyway, before we jump into this, Sarah, what's something good that happened lately?
Something good that happened is I have a weekly team meeting every Wednesday. And normally it's like, it runs for an hour. Normally it's about 10% content that should be a meeting, 90% content that should have been a Slack message. And today it was 99% useful meeting content.
Amazing.
Yeah, that was really nice. I was not texting you constantly during it going, this is so painful, please make it stop.
I understand. I also text you when I'm like, just turn my camera off because I can't keep a straight face right now.
I think the remarkable thing about that is that you have your camera on in meetings to begin with.
Different industry.
It's true.
Yeah.
I used to have my camera on with my boss when we had our biweekly one-on-ones, and he kept making comments about it, like, wow, you have your camera on. I guess I'll turn mine on too. Eventually, I just gave up.
You got the hint.
I got the hint.
My good thing is that we had some leftovers. We had done some like meal prep and put like meals together in the freezer and Tupperware. And then there was a electrical situation. My house is a shit show. And the chest freezer like thawed and refroze a couple times.
Oh no. I thought that you had fixed your electrical work.
Yes, except we didn't realize that the chest freezer was on the same circuit as our car charger.
Oh.
So it didn't flip the breaker. It's a GFI outlet. And so we just had to hit reset.
Yeah.
But we don't go into the garage. And the freezer is not always on. So it's usually fine. But sometimes we'd go in there and go, oh, how long has this been off? Good. Great. So we dealt with that and cleaned a bunch of ice cream sludge out of the bottom of our freezer. But we had these like chicken and rice and broccoli meals that had become just like the worst texture, the worst in the world.
Oh no.
This is not the good thing, obviously.
Clearly not, because that sounds terrible.
But I thought, hey, you know what's supposed to be weird and mushy? Soup. So I chopped the chicken up small, and now I have chicken and rice soup. And it's great.
That's not bad.
The broccoli is mushy, but it's soup. I'm expecting that texture.
I'm glad that you were able to figure out a way to make your leftovers palatable.
Yep. I wouldn't call it my favorite soup in the world, but I'm not
but it's
like
edible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't have to throw away all that food. So that's good.
Yep. That is a good thing.
Yeah.
That is definitely a good thing.
Threw a can of tomato sauce in there, sprinkle some cheese on top. Golden.
Cheese makes everything better.
It's true. Oh, what are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking wine.
All right. I considered going out and getting brandy because Tasselhoff in this book, who is a kender, which is a hobbit, or a halfling, to use the D&D term, even though they're hobbits. Kenders are halflings, right?
Tasselhoff definitely seems like a halfling.
He's a halfling, yeah.
I'm not familiar with this particular setting, really, but I would call him a halfling.
Yeah, I am mostly familiar with Forgotten Realms, but we're not there yet.
We're not there yet. We can't talk about it yet.
Anyway, at one point, Tasselhoff has some brandy that he had swiped from an innkeep or barkeep that he shares on the adventure. So I was like, oh, that'd be fun. But then I was like, no, this is D&D. And what is the most classic D&D thing?
Ale?
Poorly timed fireball.
Okay, you got me there.
I guess it's not poorly timed because this is the perfect time, but I am, yes, fireball. I'm drinking fireball.
Better you than me, so I can say.
I've probably told my fireball story on air before, but I'm going to do it again.
We've had a couple of D&D related podcasts, so you probably have.
Too bad. You're a captive audience. You can't press pause or fast forward. You're incapable.
Our listeners can.
That was the joke, that they absolutely can. Yes.
I thought you were talking to me because no, I can't.
Yeah, no, you can't. That's true. But I know you don't remember my fireball story, so I don't care either.
What is your fireball story?
Oh, just, every campaign has the like fireball gone horribly wrong. We picked up an amulet of fireball and gave it to our dwarven fighter. And so, of course, he uses it right away because it's a fun new toy. But he uses it in a small room and absolutely obliterates all of the magical artifacts in the room.
Oh, no.
And, I mean, damaged us, but we were high enough level that it was like a nuisance. He didn't wipe us out.
You could take it.
Yeah. But he's also the character who was like super into loot. There's always one of those as well. And so he was like, I searched the room for loot. And Danny's the forever DM. Poor Danny. He was like, well, remember that fireball 10 minutes ago? It was very funny. Anyway, thank you for indulging me.
You're welcome. It is a good story. You're right. I didn't remember it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like hearing it for the first time.
Exactly. Okay, one last question before we jump into this book that I have a myriad of opinions about. Have you read anything good lately?
In kind of timely coincidence, I've been reading Orconomics by J. Zachary Pike, I think is the author's name.
Oh, you gave me that book. I have that book.
I did, because I bought a copy of it and the bookstore accidentally sent me two. But I'm actually not reading the physical copy. I somehow, at some point between buying the paperback and now, I also bought an ebook without realizing that I owned the paperback. So I'm reading the ebook, and it is a very good satire on heroism, the hero business in D&D. It actually kind of reminds me of the Hero Interviews by Andy Ewington, not in the sense that they have the same plot or anything, but they both kind of satirize that heroics in a different vein, but similar way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's interesting because while I was reading Dragons of Autumn Twilight, I just kept thinking, I'd kind of rather be reading the part about the dragon was mostly true by Sean Gibson.
Yeah, I get that.
Okay, we're just in content now. It's fine. We have read some really good D&D satire novels that are just so much more compelling. However, I do think there is still value of seeing like the source material,
Yeah, and I was really glad actually to read Dragons of Autumn Twilight because Dragonlance is one of those series that I've always been peripherally aware of, but that passed me by as a reader. I'm not sure why I never picked them up as a teenager because it's definitely the kind of book that I would have gone for, and yet I just never did. But it's interesting to see some of the foundational D&D novelizations.
Yeah, foundational is the right word.
Yeah, so like I'm glad to have read it. It's not in terms of D&D related books, it's probably not my favorite.
That's already such a specific category. As far as D&D related books that have a dragon that is a bad guy and also takes place in this time period, it's maybe not my top 5.
And yet we've read an awful lot of D&D related books.
We got a type, what can I say?
It's true. So yeah, it's maybe not the right. I think I really would have liked this book had I come to it younger. As an adult with no nostalgia factor for it, it doesn't hit quite as hard for me.
I mean, reading it in 2023, it was like 40 years after it came out.
Yeah, almost exactly, I think, because it came out in 1984.
Yeah, it feels like it's 40 years old.
It does. I would really be interested in reading the first Drizzt book, because those books I did read as a teenager and I haven't read since. And it would be, I think, fascinating to see how it holds up and how it compares, and how I feel reading it as an adult who has actually played D&D versus a kid who had never played D&D.
So the Drizzt books are inherently like playing on a trope, right? Because Drizzt is a drow, which is a typically matrilineal society. And so that very concept is sort of turning something on its head. And I would say probably my main takeaway from Dragons of Autumn Twilight is that everything that you see is what you get.
Well, and I think that the reason why that is partly because it's a campaign novelization, right? Like, this is a D&D campaign. Well, my understanding, and I could be wrong, so if you know more about Dragonlance than we do, please write in and correct us.
Oh, I thought you were talking to me for a second, and I was like, God, no.
No, I know you don't know more Dragonlance than I do.
Like I said, I'm a Forgotten Realms girl. I can talk about that lore pretty thoroughly, mostly because Daniel reads campaign books for fun. And so I get some of that by osmosis. It's a sexually transmitted disease. But yeah, Dragonlance is like not, I don't know.
Yeah, but so my understanding is that who's the company? TSR at this point had written the first like campaign book, D&D campaign, and they wanted to turn it into a novelization. And Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman actually had a D&D campaign running that they novelized, essentially, that was following that module.
That makes me like it a lot more, actually.
Yeah, and I believe that they mention in the introduction to this book, because obviously, maybe it's not the introduction. I don't think there is an introduction. Maybe it's just the Wikipedia page, because I did read the Wikipedia page. They mention that Raistlin in particular developed a lot because of how he was played in the campaign.
I would love to read an interview with their like group.
I'm pretty sure that Jody from Witty and Sarcastic Book Club, who is a big Dragonlance fan, has interviewed Margaret Weis and possibly Tracy Hickman. But you're talking about the whole group.
That's great. No, I want to hear like what the player who played Raistlin.
It's ST.
ST, thank you.
Yeah.
I want to know what that player thinks of the depiction of his character in the, like, you know, I want the like the tea.
Yeah. But I also, and for as much as this book didn't really work for me, I was left feeling interested in reading further. So I guess in that way it was successful. But also because the Wikipedia page says that for books after this, Weis and Hickman said, we're going to write the novel first and then you'll write the module, versus having to write the book based on the module. And so I think seeing how that makes the book feel more organically like a book and less like a D&D campaign would also be interesting.
But is it still based on their like game?
It is still based on their game, I think, yeah.
So it's still gonna feel like pretty episodic.
It is. I mean, like, I don't think that it would fix all of the problems that I had with this book necessarily, but I think it might smooth out some of the rougher transitions.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
It is kind of wild that this book was written by two women.
It was not written by two women.
Is Tracy not a lady?
Tracy is not a lady.
Margaret's a lady.
Margaret is a lady.
Okay. That's less wild now. That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yes.
I mean, my opinions about the female characters in this book stands, but I think we're going to talk about that in the spoiler section so I can really get into it.
Yeah, I don't think we can talk about the women of this novel without talking about spoilers. So that'll come later.
I mean, we can. It's just going to be lots of bleeping out and then, you know, that one thing, and it wouldn't be fun for anybody.
No, not even for us.
Okay, before we dive into the actual content of this novel, I did want to do a quick overview of the Dungeons and Dragons shit in the book.
I think it's the book that cleaves most closely to the D&D rules that I've read.
I read a absolutely random novelization called Unclean or something. It's very edgelord. I was in high school. I give no excuses. That also had a lot of undead monsters in that book that match very closely to monsters from, I think it was 3rd edition.
Mm.
And then a lot of very closely described spells. Anyway, not the point. We're not talking about that random book that no one else in the entire world has read. No, this book, I think specifically around the spell casting.
Yeah, the spell casting was definitely where I felt it.
But it didn't feel too forced.
It definitely, I mean, I agree that it didn't feel forced, but it was noticeable, I think. And maybe that's because a lot of the D&D related novels that I've read, satire or otherwise, are not officially licensed. And so they have the serial numbers filed off.
Mm.
And this goes, whole hog.
Yeah, I mean,
it's official.
They cast Fireball.
They cast Fireball. They talk about needing long rests.
I loved the way that it handled, or not the way that it handled spell slots, because it handled it the way that the rules are. But the way they were described in world, I thought was very well done. And how wizards have to study their spells, and once they use them, they forget them. And that's just because the magic is so powerful. So they have to study them. And you see Raistlin studying his spell book.
You do. I liked it, but it also reminded me of cramming for a test in high school where you're frantically reading, whatever your notes are in the 5 minutes you have before the class period starts. And you know that you're going to forget it immediately, but it doesn't matter as long as you can remember it for the next 10 minutes or whatever.
That is the perfect description of the wizard class in D&D.
I've never been a magic user player. I just want to hit things.
So you liked Riverwind better, our big barbarian man.
Sure, we can say that.
I know you didn't really like any of the characters.
I didn't. I found them all frustrating for different reasons. And maybe some of that mellows out in later books. But they were all just kind of mean and unlikable.
I kind of liked that they didn't automatically trust each other. That felt genuine.
It did.
However, I think it went too far. And it got to the point where I was just like, oh my God, we get it. You don't like him because he's got weird eyes. Can you stop?
Yeah. Yeah, it was just a little much.
But I don't think any of them were so frustrating that it impacted my reading of the book. I don't know. There are definitely elements of this book that I didn't like, but overall it was just so bland that I was like, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I felt like even the characters that we were supposed to like or view as the comic relief, like Tasselhoff, the Kender. I found him annoying too.
Oh yeah, he was definitely annoying. I didn't like any of the characters, but none of them had enough going on that I could build up a dislike for them either. I think is what I'm saying. I was so neutral. I could not bring myself to care.
Yeah. For me, if I don't like the characters, why am I reading the book?
Well, yeah, except we're reading the book because it has cultural importance.
Yeah. But like I said, I mean, the book left me interested enough to feel like maybe I would read book 2. So it was successful in that regard, even if I didn't like the characters.
There was nothing in it offensive enough that would make me go no, never. I find myself comparing it to Kushiel's Dart, at least in my experience of it. Not that there's anything in common between these two books.
Interesting. But your response to the book was the same.
No, it wasn't. Because in Kushiel's Dart, there was at least so much that made me so mad I was passionate about it. Whereas in this book, I was just like, oh, that's dumb. Oh, well.
Yeah, I can see that.
I did think, okay, when you first texted me that all of the characters annoyed you, I was like, well, it's kind of hard on Tanis. He seems chill so far. that was before I had gotten to the love triangle part. And then I was like, oh yeah, no.
Yeah, no. The characters frustrated me, I will say. They frustrated me a lot.
That's fair. My very first note upon reading this book was how I don't see villainous dragons that much anymore. Now, I guess we did just read The Hobbit, or not just read The Hobbit, but I mean, Smaug is a classic villainous dragon, but
yeah, I was going to say, I don't think if you're talking about any more, I don't think Smaug counts because he's a classic villainous dragon. He's not recent.
Yes.
Yeah, I do think dragons got a very good PR person because their image has kind of done a 180. They're sexy now.
They've gotten the vampire treatment.
They really kind of have.
And sort of everyone collectively was like, we like these guys so much. Can you just give them to us nice? Thank you. Now, Daniel pointed out when I made that exact complaint that in the lore of D&D, it's only the chromatic dragons that are evil. Chromatic, the red, black, white, regular color dragons. Whereas the metallic dragons, bronze, silver, gold, are considered good aligned. And the book does follow that.
I would also like to point out that Dragon Riders of Pern by Anne McCaffrey, which I think it would be really interesting, again, to cover one of those on the podcast. I have large nostalgia for them, but there are definitely some issues with them. Dragon Riders of Pern features good dragons, and that series, the first book came out in 1967. So it's not like there were no good dragons way back when.
No, that wasn't my argument. My argument was that there's no evil dragons anymore.
True.
So yeah, there were good dragons. And now we're like, nah, we only want the good ones. We like dragons too much. I don't want to see them be bad guys anymore. We as a collective, humanity as a whole has decided we're into dragons.
But only good dragons.
Well, no, we want them to be good because we're into them.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Anyway, there is a black dragon who does breathe acid, and I was like, fuck yeah! That is a breath weapon win for the D&D nerd.
The dragons did seem very D&D.
Casting darkness all over the place that functions correctly.
I don't have quite the D&D background that you do, so some of those nuances went over my head.
Yeah, your tabletop RPG is more in the like Pathfinder vein, right?
Pathfinder, like I have played D&D. I had a couple of D&D games in college, but my recent...
That would have been 4th edition. Gross.
Was it 4th edition?
I don't think 5th was out yet.
Might have been 3.5.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't 5. Like, yeah. I can tell you that it was not 5, but it might not have been 4. It might have been 3.5. But also, that was a longer time ago than I would like to think about.
Well, if you were playing 3.5.
I do think 4 was out, to be fair.
Mm-hmm.
But I think our DM just didn't want to deal with it. But yeah, my recent experience is Pathfinder or Fate, which is very much non-numerical, and I didn't like it at all. Fate is not the system for me. And Pathfinder and D&D have a lot of overlap.
Yeah, definitely. But as far as, like you said, the serial numbers or whatever, the Fireball TM.
Yeah.
This book got to lead into that hard.
Yeah. And I don't think that in any of the campaigns that I played in Pathfinder, or even the D&D campaigns that I played, I don't think we ever had a wizard.
That means you didn't get Featherfall, the most useful, boringest spell.
We did not get Featherfall.
Shows up in this book, though.
It does show up in this book. And we also get to see a character not cast Featherfall.
No, just cast Feather.
Yes, I did like Fizban. I mean, I have questions about him. Obviously, you're supposed to.
Oh, see, he bothered me. The mysterious old man who won't tell anyone anything but expects people to listen to him anyway bugs the hell out of me.
See, I think I liked him because he at least was very intentional about what he was doing. And he was intentional about being annoying. And I can respect that. Whereas the others were just annoying.
I think I liked Raceland a lot better than you did.
I mean, of the main party, Raceland was probably my favorite.
He being the spooky wizard for listeners.
Yes. He still frustrated me. And so I think I liked Fizban better, but I liked him the most out of the companions.
I have many opinions about Goldmoon and Riverwind, who are our two barbarian. Well, I guess Goldmoon was a cleric, but they are from a barbarian tribe.
Culturally barbarian, but not necessarily class barbarian.
Outlander background, you would say in 5th edition jargon. Yeah, we haven't talked about this book, like the actual content, too much.
We have not.
It's a D&D party traveling across the land trying to save the world. I mean, that's what it is.
It's a D&D party trying to save the world from evil dragons that are coming and want to do something bad.
We're not sure. Probably rule the world or destroy it. I don't know. Whatever villains do.
Yeah, I think at this point it's still unclear because this is just book 1 in a series. So there's a lot that's still kind of up in the air.
How long is this series? I mean, I know Dragonlance has like multiple series in it, but just like this core one.
Yeah, Dragonlance as a whole is quite long.
I did have a surprised Pikachu moment when we read the like song at the beginning. That was like, oh, Herna killed the dragon with his lance.
Uma.
And I was like, oh, they're fighting dragons. That's what a dragon lance is. I get it.
I did have that moment too. Wikipedia says it's the first in the Chronicles trilogy. So presumably it's a trilogy.
See, I would be willing to finish a trilogy.
Which, along with the Dragonlance Legends trilogy, are generally regarded as the core novels.
Because then there's the Dragonlance universe, which of course expands beyond that.
Yeah.
See, that's a reasonable number of books. I would read 3 books.
I mean, maybe we'll read Dragons of Winter Night and Dragons of Spring Dawning for the podcast.
Maybe. I will say this was Dragons of Autumn something.
Autumn Twilight.
It is autumn. I guess it's not technically, but the weather has started to turn. The leaves are going. It was so perfectly atmospheric. Just the experience of reading this book was like very cozy.
What you're saying is that we should rework our schedule so that we can read Dragons of Winter Night in December and then read Dragons of Spring Dawning in like March.
Perhaps.
We'll see what happens. But yes, it looks like it is a trilogy.
There were a couple of other fantasy tropes that show up. Not tropes, but fantasy mainstays. I mean, you got your half-elf ranger as the main character. We do meet elves eventually.
They're kind of dicks.
That's normal. I'm okay with that.
That is normal.
Yeah. Flint is a dwarf who kind of just solidifies my righteous anger on behalf of all dwarves everywhere.
I did think that Flint deserved better.
He really, he basically only shows up on the page to be the butt of a slapstick joke.
Yeah, I actually was really excited that we were going to see Flint because in the very first couple of chapters, he's our point of view character for a hot second. And I thought, oh, wow, we're getting this hero who is kind of over-heroing. He's a little bit arthritic. He just wants to settle down and enjoy his retirement. And that could be a really interesting perspective. But that was not actually what we got.
This book did not do that.
No.
Anytime you were like, oh, that could be a really interesting thing. Oh, no, you're just doing the normal thing. All right, cool.
Although, to be fair, doing the normal thing in 1984 was probably more interesting than, quote unquote, the normal thing in 2023 is.
That's true. But I don't know.
I mean, it means it doesn't necessarily hold up.
Yeah.
But I do think that the novel deserves a little more credit than we are giving.
That's a good point. I mean, does this participate in creating the tropes, not just following them?
And I think it does.
Maybe. It's hard to say that because it's based on D&D. And so it's just pulling tropes from D&D.
But would those D&D tropes be popular if it weren't for the Dragonlance novels?
Yeah, chicken egg. You're right. And like I said, it didn't actually bother me. Reading this book, I mean, obviously I have criticisms of it. But nothing in it made me go, ugh.
Which is more than we can say for some books from 1984 that we've read.
Yes, and more recent ones.
And more recent ones, it's true.
Okay, that's not true. There was one thing that made me go, ugh. It was the centaur dialogue.
I don't remember it, and I kind of feel like that's because I tried to block it out of my head because it was so bad.
So centaurs show up at one point. Don't worry why, it's fine.
As does a unicorn.
Nay, thee doesn't need to squeeze me in two. It be my job to see thee stays on. Relax. Put thy hands on me rump to balance thyself. There now, grip with thy legs. And I do realize that that was a funny line to take out of context because it's a centaur and someone's trying to ride him. That wasn't the point. The point was the like weird mix of Middle English.
I mean, it's pretty bad.
It's like inconsistent.
It's pretty bad.
It's all over the place.
Yeah, that's no wonder I didn't remember that.
Put thy hands on me rump.
Half fake Middle English, half pirate.
Yeah. So there were definitely some things where I was like, this could be improved. But I mean, overall, it was a fun story. It felt very quickly paced because you are moving through these dungeons very fast.
It's definitely episodic.
Yeah, but there's still like the overarching goal. You know, they meet Gold Moon and she has a problem that I'm not really going to get into before we hit the spoiler section. And that's like driving all of their little mini adventures. So it does feel cohesive.
It does. I mean, we get to the climactic battle, and I did kind of feel like, how are they going to solidify all of these threads or resolve all of these threads in the 35 pages that they have left? And I felt like they did that by skipping over a lot of stuff.
That's just the first book in a trilogy.
Yeah, but that's not all trilogies are like that.
Yeah.
So I did feel that the ending was a little rushed. Like, I actually wanted a little more page time devoted to that final battle.
I can see that. There's also no traveling on the page ever. They basically go to sleep and then wake up at their destination. And that's very D&D to me.
Yeah, and that I didn't mind, because unless the traveling serves a purpose for character development, I feel like you can skip it.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's a lot of traveling in Wheel of Time, for example, that could have been cut out, and it would have made the book so much better if you didn't have to deal with those pages and pages where they're traveling and nothing happens. So I was glad that we didn't see that here.
I mean, I think that's why this is a tight trilogy. And not
Yes.
8 books where its biggest fans tell you to skip some of them.
14 books.
Oh, yeah. See, that's how much I care about Wheel of Time. All right. Who should read this book? If you like D&D, if you like classic fantasy, if you're interested in some of the foundational works of those genres, this is an interesting read.
Yeah.
It's worth it. It didn't make me mad.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't love everything about it, but I think that it is worth reading if you are into all of those things, which I am. So I'm glad that I read it. Like, I do feel that not having read any Dragonlance was a gap in my classical, like, foundational reading. And now we fixed that.
We have to keep reading until we find the actual lance. It's got to come up eventually, right? I'm sure they find it.
Well, my impression is that there's not just one Dragonlance. You can make multiple Dragonlances. It's not a one unique item.
But we need one that's shaped like a lance.
Well, there has to be one. Yeah,
there has to be one that's shaped like a lance, and we have to see it in this series, right?
We have to, yeah.
Like, that's the law.
They talk a lot about Huma's Dragonlance, so it has to show up. It does. I agree.
I feel like we have to read until we find the lance. And the second it shows up on page, I can go, all right, done.
So we actually are going to cover on the podcast, we're going to cover the books up until the point where a dragon lance in lance shape shows up on the page, and we're not going to discuss that book after that. No, you're right. You're right, though. I do think we should cover books 2 and 3 in this trilogy.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous how, like, I don't want to say not into it, but why are we so compelled by this story?
I think that's a good question, because I'm definitely not into it, but I'm also kind of into it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't know. So it definitely succeeds on that level, of making you want to know what happens next, even if you don't really like the characters, you don't really care about what's happening, you still want to know what happens next.
Before we started recording, I described this book as American cheese.
And I think that's apt because you can't stop eating.
You know exactly what you're gonna get.
Mm-hmm.
And it's real good melted over tater tots.
Mm-hmm.
To avoid spoilers, skip to 1 hour 40 seconds. Okay, so there are a couple of romances in this book, and I'm not gonna address the love triangle right now because again, yes, this book was written a while ago, before love triangles were quite so tiresome, but I'm still carrying that baggage in my heart.
I think that's fair and valid. Would you really call the relationships in this book romances?
I don't know what your definition of that is. Yeah. They get married at the end. That's a romance.
Yeah, but we don't see any of that progression. For a lot of the time, I mean, we're specifically talking about Goldmoon and Riverwind, who I do really want to call Rincewind all of the time. Like, a lot of the time, they're mad at each other and don't seem to like each other. And
I actually kind of really liked that. Because the thing is that Goldmoon was the chieftain's daughter, the princess or whatever, and so Riverwind had to go on an adventure and find an artifact in order to be allowed to date her. And so he's gone for years, like 5+ years was my memory. It's a long time.
It did seem like a long time, yeah.
So you get these characters who fell in love when they were, in their early 20s, are separated for a long ass time, both go through separate trials, and then come together and are immediately dealing with the chaos of this adventure and trying to reconcile their memories of each other and what their relationship is now, and really meeting each other for the first time, but already in this commitment. I thought that was very interesting.
It didn't feel earned to me.
But that's
the resolution didn't feel earned.
Okay. The resolution didn't feel. I say the point is that they're suddenly close, even though they didn't earn their closeness, and that's what makes it fascinating. But they just get married at the end, and everything's kind of hand waved away.
Yeah, everything is kind of hand waved away, and I think that you're right that their dynamics could have been really interesting, but they're kind of held at a distance from the reader because neither of them are ever the point of view character, really. At least not when it comes to how they feel about each other. I can't recall if we ever see much from their point of view. We might from Goldmoon's. And so how they relate to each other and how their relationship evolves, we mostly see through Tanis's eyes. And it doesn't ever feel like their relationship progresses enough for their happy marriage at the end to feel satisfying.
I feel like as it was introduced, my reaction was, oh, this is a really interesting dynamic. The idea that these people are in a relationship for good reasons, like they chose to be in a relationship but don't really know each other yet, but it's not the cheesy whirlwind romance thing, And so trying to learn to live with each other could have been interesting, but I agree it's not followed through well.
Yeah, it just didn't feel like there was any follow through.
And at one point they're just like, no, we are in love, so everything's fine.
Yeah, they argue a lot, but we never see any of the resolution. We just see the aftermath where they've miraculously fixed their problems and are okay.
I mean, okay, Riverwind does get melted alive by the black dragon's acid breath, which was a gnarly scene, by the way.
That was a very gnarly scene. We also see Goldmoon die when she's trying to take out the black dragon. They both quote unquote die in close proximity to each other.
And I feel like that could have been handled as, oh, when faced with losing you, I've realized that I am committed to making this work, even though that is going to take work, which could have been that could have worked, which I've now used too many times. But instead of them yeah, we are committed to this and we'll figure it out, whatever happens, Instead, it's, no, we're in love, so everything's fine.
Yeah. Well, again, I think that part of the problem is that we never see their inner monologue, right? We never see how they actually feel about the situation and about the other one basically being dead or thought dead for a short period of time. We see it from an outsider's point of view, which holds us as a reader at a distance. And it's hard to be invested in a relationship like that.
Yeah. So Tanis is our main character. And I would say through like the first half of this book, I was like, oh, if he and Goldmoon end up getting together, I'm going to be so mad. And that's still true. If they end up getting together, I'll still be so mad. That didn't end up happening in this book. But I think part of it was because they were on the cover together. And so I was like, oh, it's the two of them.
They are on the cover together. It's true.
And then also Flint, which is an affirmative action choice if I've ever seen one. Flint is on the page like maybe 4 times in this entire novel.
As we've already talked about, Flint does not get a lot of screen time.
And when he does, it's always jokes at his expense. And so putting him on the cover is just, it's a fantasy book. We need a dwarf on there.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think seeing them on the cover together, I was just like, okay. And there's at one point, he gives her like a shoulder massage. And I was like, hell no.
That was weird.
Unacceptable.
That was just weird.
It could have been, I mean, these people are adventuring together. You get weirdly close. But you never see him do that for Caramon, the big bulky fighter man. Who I'm sure would appreciate a shoulder massage wearing plate mail around.
Or Sturm, the knight.
Yeah. Where are their shoulder massages?
They deserve massages too.
Yeah. Anyway, so that happened and I was just like, oh, hell no. I was getting so upset. And then Goldmoon dies, right? She takes out the dragon and sacrifices herself at the same time. And Riverwind is obviously, like, crushed and is basically going to leave himself to die in this collapsing dungeon. But Tanis and Riverwind had sort of come to an understanding earlier. They had gotten fairly close. They trusted and respected each other.
Although, and quick side note before you continue on with your point, that also frustrated me because not that happened, that they had had this relationship, but that after this one point, it's never brought up again.
Yeah, that's not part of my point, but it's not unrelated. Oh yeah, because up until now, I was just like, oh shit, Riverwind is going to die, and Tanis is going to comfort Goldmoon with his penis. Like, that's where this is going, obviously.
Yeah, obviously.
But then instead, Goldmoon dies, and Tanis is the only one who can get Riverwind to get moving. And Riverwind is willing to not sacrifice himself, but just give up until Tanis needs help getting out. And he's like, no, like, I'm protecting this man with my life. And I was like, oh, nowhere in my heart of hearts did I think this was actually going to happen. But what if Goldmoon was the one who died and then Tanis comforts Riverwind with his penis? They've actually built up rapport over the course of the book.
I'd read that fan fiction.
Yeah, right? And that would have felt earned because Tanis has to convince Riverwind to even go on this adventure with them. So, like, you see the two of them having not heart-to-hearts exactly, but like being sincere with each other.
They do build, in the first half of the book, you're right, they do build a relationship, and we do see Riverwind open up to Tanis more than he opens up to anyone else in the group.
Including Goldmoon.
Including Goldmoon, yeah.
Oh, so then at that moment I was just like, oh, I know this isn't going to happen, but how fun would it be? And then it turns out Goldmoon's not dead. And I was like, dang it.
And then Riverwind and Tanis never talk again.
Yeah, that's, yes, very frustrating. I wonder how much AO3.
I feel like if there's AO3 fanfiction, a large part of it is going to be Raistlin.
In my head, I was just like, what combination of 2 names is that ship? And then I was like, no, that's just one guy.
That's just one guy.
That, and then there's going to be a lot of reader insert of like Tika.
You mean the author inserting themselves as Tika?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a can of worms that I wasn't expecting. All right, let's move on.
Wait, now you have me intrigued.
Number one, okay, there's not actually a ton of stuff on AO3.
Okay.
There's only like 500 works.
And how are you sorting?
Just for the category works in Dragonlance.
No, but I mean, like, is it just what has been updated most recently? Is it most kudos, most popular? Like,
oh, so I went to the drop-down menu for relationship categories.
Okay.
And was looking at, because it organizes by this relationship has the most stories. Yeah. I know you know, but the reader might, or the listener might not. I don't know who Dalamar the Dark is. So whoever he is, he's begging Raistlin, apparently. And then I immediately noped out, that's dramatic. But I went, okay, I don't even want to deal with this, because the second most common one is, of course, Caramon and Raistlin, because you can't have twins if they're not fucking each other.
It's true.
Yeah. And when it comes to like dumbass fan fiction, that doesn't bother me. It's just boring. Could you do anything else, please? Thank you, fan fiction authors.
Yeah, like I'm not one of those people who's like, oh, you ship twincest, that means you're, an incest supporter in real life. No, but it is a boring pairing.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, that was, I was like, meh. I'm not interested in this anymore.
Okay, fair. Back to our non-fanfiction discussion.
Poor Tika. Oh, God.
Yeah, we do need to talk about Tika.
Nothing bad happens to her in this book, or at least not specifically. I mean, her whole, like, city and life gets burned down, but that happens to all the characters. She's not special.
Yeah, that's not something uniquely bad that happens to her. But I really wanted to like Tika as a character, but the way she's described is so cringy. So she's this barmaid from their hometown who she ends up joining their party about halfway through the book because her whole town has been burned down.
And until that point, she's pretty cool. She doesn't do much. She helps them out of a scrape or two. She whacks someone over the head with an iron frying pan. Like, it's good background barmaid stuff.
Yeah.
Stands up for herself. Like, great, fine.
Yeah, and then the moment she becomes a main character, she loses all competency. She somehow is incompetent with a sword. Like, she's more dangerous to her party than she is to the enemies. I think they describe her as almost hitting Caramon with her sword when she's in battle at one point.
She does do some fun shield bashing, though.
She does, but only after she's been incompetent.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not arguing that this character was handled well. I'm just...
Yeah.
I feel like I could have really liked her. Like, nothing that she does is bad, but the book and all of the characters are very condescending and mean to her.
Yeah. And apparently she has a reputation as someone who sleeps around, even though she herself is actually like a blushing virgin. And that was just really awkward. She has this thing for Caramon that's awkward. I think what I would characterize her character as awkward.
But not even, like, not her. It's not like she is awkward in her interactions.
It's not her. It's the way that her relationships are described with the other characters.
At the beginning, when the crew shows up and are like, why are you familiar? And she's like, you said my dad would have to pay someone to marry me. And they were like, oh shit, you're hot now. And it's like, but you knew her when she was a kid and made that horrible joke that apparently is charming and funny. I don't know. And the person who made that joke is Caramon, who, I mean, I liked Caramon until the weird romance with her. I didn't like him, but I had there's nothing wrong with him.
Yeah, okay, that's fair.
I thought, like, his relationship with his brother is sweet. I like that he stands up for Raistlin, but I thought he was fine. I don't know. I was much more neutral on all of these characters than you were.
You clearly were. I was definitely negative.
Well, once he started, like, weirdly hitting on Tika, I became negative for sure.
Yeah, his relationship with Tika was not great. I wasn't Caramon's hugest fan, I think, because of the way that everyone compared him to Raistlin. And as I've said, I didn't like Raistlin as much as you did, but I liked him of the companions. I liked him the best. And I felt really bad because he's constantly being compared to his popular athletic twin brother.
Mm-hmm.
And that just seems rough.
Yeah, I think I had a lot of sympathy for Raistlin. He's a frail wizard who saves their asses a bunch.
A lot.
Clearly never got along with them. But now, like, they come back, they'd all been adventuring separately for 5 years. And they meet back up. And he's gone through physical trauma. And they're all like, oh, you look weird. I don't trust you.
Yeah.
Horrible.
It's clear that they tolerate him because they like his brother. And that's a horrible place to be.
But I like that Karaman is like, no, fuck you guys. Of course Raistlin is chill. I like that.
Yeah, but I don't think that Karaman actually understands his brother either.
No, but you don't have to understand someone to stick up for them and be in their corner.
No, but doing that without having some kind of understanding, I think, leads to a lot of resentment.
Maybe. I think it says that he was present when Raistlin went through the, like, magical rites that turned him into this, like...
He clearly knows at least something about what happened to Raistlin, yeah.
Anyway, this isn't me defending Karaman, because I don't care that much about him. So Raistlin is put in this awful situation, and then whenever it comes up, he's just like, yeah, no, you don't have to trust me. Fuck you guys, I get it. Trust me or don't. I'm not going to prove myself to you. And I really liked that.
Raistlin gave me big villain vibes, which the Wikipedia does say things about that.
I did read that one spoiler to you, which I'm not going to do to our listeners just in case. But even just saying that out loud.
No, but I had known before, yeah, because I read the Wikipedia page too.
I mean, even reading this book, and I know this is a backwards comparison to make, but he gave me big Willow vibes. Not the movie Willow about hobbits, but like Willow from Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Like, I just was reading, I was just going, oh, this is like Willow if she had just like kept on trucking and didn't get pulled back into meek good self.
Yep.
If she had like not been with... I'm not going to spend the next half an hour comparing this to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So I'm just going to stop now. But if you know, you know.
Yeah. I would really be interested in reading the series where Raistlin is both spoiler and spoiler. I think you know what I'm trying to say.
I know what you're trying to say.
Yes.
No, I mean, yeah, I think it might make me a basic bitch, but I did like him quite a bit.
I think if I had liked Raistlin more, I can't say this because I feel like that's too spoilery.
For a future series, you mean? Because we're in the spoiler section.
Yeah, for a future series.
Well, I will say this. We know that he is the main character in another series, and I would be definitely interested in trying that out.
Yeah.
It would be also interesting to read, like, I don't know anything about Weis and Hickman. Like, are they authors before this? Maybe their writing and their characters and their plotting grows over time.
I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that TSR had originally hired another author to write the first Dragonlance novelization. And they were somehow in charge of that process, but I don't think they had necessarily hired the author. And they were unhappy with it. And they were like, we could do this better. And then they did.
Oh, I want to read that first manuscript now.
Yeah, me too. So she applied... Margaret Weis in 1983 applied for a job as a game editor at TSR, and they turned her down but hired her as a book editor.
I'm sorry, you keep saying TSR. Is this Wizards of the Coast shit that I just don't know about?
TSR is the original publisher of Dungeons and Dragons, founded by Gary Gygax and Don Kay.
Interesting.
Yeah, TSR, Wikipedia says it was Tactical Studies Rules. And I think they were bought out by Wizards of the Coast.
Okay. That was my question, was like, did it morph into Wizards of the Coast? Did it get bought by Wizards of the Coast? Did it splinter into... That was my question.
I'm pretty sure that it was bought by Wizards of the Coast, but TSR was the original, because there is a Tolkien scholar who wrote the annotated Hobbit, John Rateliff, who is related to TSR or Wizards of the Coast. He's done a lot of work for them. And that's how I know. But yeah, so Wikipedia says that she was applied for a role for a job as game editor, hired as book editor. They hired an author to write this novel, then decided that the author sucked and they were going to write it themselves. And the book was a smashing success. So this might actually have been their first book.
In that case, I'm more interested in reading more stuff because, of course, they're going to grow, you know?
Yeah, if this is actually their first book, and I don't know about Hickman, but if this is actually their first novel or early novel, for both of them, then I'm definitely more intrigued by reading more.
I certainly am. I did a little Googling because, of course, I'm a stan for Wizards. They're Seattle local boys, have been bought out by Hasbro not recently, but in recent history. But I was very curious. Google was not helpful because I tried to find out what they started with and it was like Magic the Gathering. And I was like, no.
John Rateliff did work for TSR and then Wizards of the Coast.
Wizards of the Coast was founded in 1990. When did it buy D&D? 97. So it had like a decade and a half before Wizards got its hands on it.
Yeah, because TSR was founded in 1973, and then it went defunct in 1997, which was when Wizards bought it.
Oh, Hasbro bought Wizards a lot longer ago than I thought.
Yeah, I thought that was an old acquisition.
Okay, JK. I've just been blaming all of their recent bad decisions on Hasbro, and I guess I can't do that.
To be fair, and I don't actually remember when Hasbro bought Wizards, but the merger process generally takes a long time. And I know that because the company that I work for was bought by a larger company. And it's only now, which is like 5 or 6 years later, that we're finally like fully integrated. And not even fully integrated. We're like 90% integrated. So it takes a long time.
That's a very good point. It was bought in September 1999.
Okay. 20 years? Yeah, maybe not.
Yeah, I don't know. I hear a lot of the Magic the Gathering drama. Anyway, we're not getting into that right now. Sorry, there was a 100-yard stare for a minute that I'm just going to edit out. No one will know that happened.
I do have a comment I want to make about that, and I'm not going to because it's not relevant to our conversation.
Wait, what's your comment?
My comment was that didn't Hasbro hire thugs to shake down someone in LA who had gotten their hands on an early version of some like Magic the Gathering card? This is like recent, like within the last 2 years.
I don't know about that. I'm mostly talking about the like merchandising gimmicks that Magic has been doing. They've been doing a lot of crossovers that are just very transparent. I mean, I'm not saying that didn't happen.
No. It definitely happened.
That's not even the drama I'm talking about. I'm talking about players being mad about gameplay decisions.
Oh yeah, so it was a YouTuber's house was raided by Wizards of the Coast over Magic the Gathering. They sent Pinkerton agents to his front door because he had fancy cards that he wasn't supposed to have, but he got them accidentally and he didn't realize he wasn't supposed to have them.
Well, that happens.
Yeah, but they didn't have to send thugs to him.
I mean, no, there's no excuse. It is pretty cool that when they did the Lord of the Rings set, they only made the One Ring card.
Oh, I like that. I do like that.
Yes, that is like a shitty publicity stunt, but it works.
It's a shitty publicity stunt, but it's also a good publicity stunt.
Yeah. Anyway, Post Malone has it. He was like, anyone who gets it, I'll buy it from you for some stupid amount of money. And it happened. And he was like, yeah, give me that shit.
Good for him for actually following through on his promise.
Yeah. So he has the One Ring.
And to be fair, the art on that looked really nice.
Mm-hmm. They do hire actual artists to do all their art.
Yeah. And I think that like their Aragorn card was the black dude who looks hot.
We need more of those in popular culture. Wait. You know what I mean.
We need more hot black Aragorn art.
Yes. We've gotten so off track.
We have. It's true.
But this is a novelization of an intellectual property, and that does sort of open up these other rabbit holes. I'm not only justifying our weird tangent, but also, how can you not? this book is inextricably linked to the Dungeons and Dragons IP. It is like that's what it is.
I mean, it's an IP work. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And so all of the conversation around Gygax and Dungeons and Dragons and Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro and Post Malone.
They're relevant, damn it.
It gets that baggage. IP works benefit from being recognizable, but the flip side of that is a lot of baggage comes with it.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a point to make.
You don't have to argue with me. You are allowed to agree with me.
No, I'm not trying to argue, but I don't have anything relevant to say other than, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. No, 90% of that was justifying our ridiculous tangent, but I'm also not wrong.
I'm just impressed you're keeping our tangent in the episode and not cutting it entirely.
That's the kind of shit I think is interesting. And unfortunately, I'm the one who decides what content stays.
It's true. It's true. I have a pet peeve that's completely unrelated to this book.
Well, it could be related to this book if the authors weren't cowards and followed through on some of the implied romance.
That's true. It could, but they didn't, so it's not.
No, yeah, it's completely off topic, but I was trying. I did such a good job at the end of the last bit of working it all together. I thought I could keep going. I flew too close to the sun.
No, I think you were like Icarus, I'm afraid. So my pet peeve, I was reading a fan fiction the other day, and the author kept using the word butt instead of ass. So it was specifically a male gay fan fiction.
Explicit, presumably.
Explicit, yes. It was an explicit male sex fan fiction. And in the sex scenes, the author kept using the word butt instead of ass. And I just couldn't take it seriously because how can you take a sex scene that uses the word butt?
Butt, in my opinion, is not the worst one. It's almost neutral.
It's not the worst, except that it was every reference to the derriere was butt. Like there were no other words. It was just butt. They also used the word tummy at one point, which is a whole other thing. We've ranted about that before.
Okay, no. Okay. Never use a childish word in a sex scene. Am I asking so much?
Yeah.
This is mature content. Speak to me like an adult, please.
I'm sorry, but I can't take your sex scene seriously if the only way you refer to that bit of your anatomy is butt.
It's not just can't take it seriously. I would say it's actively... I'm trying to come up with a phrase that's not a turnoff because that has baggage in context and that's not what I mean.
It throws me out of the scene.
Thank you. That's what I meant.
Yes. Yes. I mean, it does, like, using it occasionally, sure, because we all want to vary our words for various bits of anatomy. That's fine. But to have it be the only word you use in an adult scene is very jarring.
Yeah, no.
And it took me out every time.
The only example of this I can think of off the top of my head is from True Blood. When Sookie is trying to say that she's really proud of her ass. She has a great ass. And like, wonderful. If you have a great ass, like, you should be happy about that.
Celebrate it.
Except she says bottom.
I do remember her saying bottom a lot.
That's just like, God, you're an adult. This is your internal monologue.
Yeah.
I don't believe for a second that you were referring to your own fine ass as a bottom.
Yeah. I remember that about the Sookie Stackhouse books. And that is very jarring as well.
Yeah. It, like, in context, like, please use the language appropriate for the scene you're describing.
Mm-hmm.
Which, if you're describing a beautiful sunset, use some purple prose, sure. If you're describing a sex scene, just say ass.
Yeah. I did eventually just have to X out of the fic.
How long did it take you? I'm so curious.
So I think it was about 36 chapters.
Jesus, I forget how long you read fanfiction. fiction.
I know. I read long fic. They were pretty short chapters. They were maybe like 1,000 words a piece. And I'm pretty sure that I got to about chapter 30 and decided it was just too much and I pieced out.
That's almost the whole thing.
I'd read this fic before, to be fair. So like this was not, I mean, I read this fic, I think, like a decade ago. It's an old fic. So I gave it a bit of leeway because I was like, you know, this was posted 15 years ago. I had lower standards then because I was younger. So I will read it now and I'll make fun of it a little bit, but it's fine. And then it just got too much for me. And I was like, no, I can't actually do this. This is too bad.
The nostalgia didn't break through, huh?
And no, it did not. It did not.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
That line gets longer every time we do this.
It does, and eventually Twitter is no longer going to be there because there's rumors that Muskrat is going to start charging people, and at that point we're no longer going to be on Twitter because we're not paying for Twitter. I'm sorry.
Well, see how that list evolves as we grow.
But you can find us generally anywhere, most social media, at Fiction Fans Pod.
And hey, if you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
We also have a Patreon where you can support us and find our show notes and a lot of other nonsense. And occasionally, you can vote on what book you think we should cover on the podcast. Like today.
Don't you wish you could have been part of Dragonlance's decision? You weren't. Maybe you were. I don't know who's listening. Anyway, thanks again for listening, and may your dragons always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.